This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
It's the left versus the right. In the right corner, it's James Flippin. In the left corner, it's Anthony Weiner. Live from Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate.
So welcome to another episode of Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on the left and James Flippin on the right. A lot of news this week, but before we go anywhere, you've been appearing a lot on the air. You filled in for James Golden the other day. You apparently have, I want to say, an organic fan club out there. Lots of people who really think you're doing a great job, including me. But someone has named your supporters the Flippinaires. What are they being called?
So by someone, you mean me. And I like alliteration, so I went with the Flip Flock.
Okay. Now,
birds of a feather, we flock together.
That's great, but why not Flippin' Flock?
Because you want to have as tidy. It's like,
It is your name, though. It's not Flip.
True. That's true. But a lot of people do know me as Flip. Like, I never was a Jim, for example, because I had a built-in nickname elsewhere.
Well, people can weigh in either in the comments if you're looking on YouTube,
Were you
or
ever
you can.
Tony? Have you ever been Tony?
So here's the funny thing: when I was elected to the city council as a young man, the speaker of the city council at the time was a guy named Peter Vallone, an Italian guy, and he called me Tony, and I was not the brash person I am today. So basically, I never corrected him. But I don't think I can pull off Tony. I don't think I'm not soprano enough. I'm not hefty enough. I'm lucky if I can pull off of Anthony. And as it is, a lot of people just don't refuse to call me Anthony. They call me Andrew or something else because they said it just doesn't fit. But in honor of my great grandmother Anna, here I am, Anthony Weiner and Flippin. Well, let's get a ton of news this week. Let's kind of generally go in chronological order. The week started in what can only be kind of a chaotic way. The President of the United States, through his Office of Management and Budget, puts out a notice basically that says, we're going to stop all funding. Not 100% of it. They say we're going to exclude Medicare. We're going to exclude Social Security, but we're going to stop all funding. And for a few hours, chaos broke out, and they had to eventually reverse it. It seemed purely chaotic, but put a better shine on it. Like, what were they trying to accomplish, and do you think they did it?
Well, I think what the official line, anyway, was that they wanted to be able to review all these different grants that go out and the different government funding that's provided to some of these different projects or pet causes. They wanted to have a tighter lid on that. It's tied into some of the stuff with Department of Government Efficiency and trying to make more efficient use of taxpayer dollars and all that kind of stuff. Of course, as you know, Anthony, it was immediately challenged by the courts and through lawsuits, and it was kind of a judge immediately put it on hold. But I think it's one of those shots across the bow type thing. In other words, we talked about it last week with the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. Is there actually any legal maneuverability here? I don't know. I'm not an attorney. I'm certainly not a constitutional scholar. But I think that some of that is an attempt to say, look, we're really serious about the way the government's overly spending and not being efficient in doing so. This is the kind of step we're going to try to take.
Yeah, and let me just say this. I 100% support the idea of every city agency, sure, but we're talking about every federal agency making a list of everything they do and making sure that from the top to the bottom they're all efficient. If they're not efficient, they should have to justify it. I totally get that. But you said that you're not a constitutional expert, but you are on the big important question of who's in charge of what in our government. And when it comes to allocating spending, the power of the purse, most eighth graders know that Congress has that control, not the executive branch. Congress decides what they're going to pay, and then the executive branch goes out and administering what Congress says. I was thinking about you all week in this context because I would imagine that most constitutional conservatives would be saying, wait a minute, this is clearly not what the Founding Fathers envisioned, that the executive branch can do whatever the heck they want after Congress has acted. Don't you agree?
I think that's a fair point. I feel like there's a lot of what's happened over the last 20, 30, 40, probably even further than that, years, that's just given too much power to the executive. You know, it's an important thing, the separation of powers, and obviously the way money is spent is a significant role of Congress and, spending bills originating in the House and stuff like that. But I do think that maybe it's about the mechanism behind how you do this. In other words, I don't know if there's a way for Trump to declare a state of emergency or issue some sort of executive order about there being a state of emergency because of the way the deficit spending continues unabated, in the way that there's no real accountability for the kind of continuous problem of spending more, having more and more money going towards the debt service as a percentage of GDP. Some of that is tied into wasteful spending or just too much government spending. And I think that's where you have some of that pushback from the Office of Budget and Management, basically saying, look, we don't want this money spent at this rate and in this way. Yes, Congress is supposed to be in charge of controlling the purse strings, but they're doing a bad job of it.
Yeah, but there's nothing in the Constitution that says that one of the branches of government has to do a good job or a bad job or they lose the business. It's still the job of Congress to do this. And it's interesting to hear you say that the executive branch has gained too much power, because I agree with that. Many conservatives, including those that are in the Project 25 group that are now in the administration, say it's the other way, that we should give the president more and more power. And here's the thing about this that's puzzling, is that there was this big decision not long ago. You reported on it in your news function about the Chevron decision, the idea that the unelected state bureaucracies of the state were taking on too much power. Those are the executive branch agencies, and what the Supreme Court has said is no. When Congress says you do something, you got to go out and do it, even if you don't like it. And I wonder, and maybe this is a good question to lob your way. Did Trump? You think this is a shot across the bow? You mean that they knew this wasn't constitutional and they just want to see if they can get away with it? Or were they trying to make some kind of a broad point? Because if the broad point was, look at all this government spending, people don't care about it, it was Republican governors and Republican senators and citizens all around the country saying, wait a minute, don't take away our programs, we need them. I mean, if that was if they were trying to make this point that all this spending and no one cares about it, there was an outcry in the country.
Well, I think that it's kind of one of those things. You've made the point well in the past, where plenty of these people who kind of talk tough about spending or wanting to cut back on certain things. It's not in my backyard, as long as it's not my special project or the military base in my state that employs a bunch of people or whatever. I think that a lot of this, that in a roundabout way, we're talking about the concept of spending and there being way too much of it. Me as a conservative, I feel that way. I've long felt that the whole idea that's been pushed on these airwaves for years by somebody like a Mark Levin is the only plausible way to do something about this. You have to have an amendment, potentially one that comes from the states themselves, because I know that's not really commonly done. But if 2/3 of the states pass this amendment, some way reining in spending constitutionally as a law, it can only be a certain percentage of GDP any given year. Something like that is the only way to actually put shackles on Congress in terms of spending money. That's not really something that I think you're right, the president can effectively do with just a stroke of a pen.
Yeah, I mean, then what it comes down to is, well, we should have a constitutional amendment to stop the American people from doing what their congressmen keep saying they want to do, which is spend money on programs, cut taxes and not pay for it, have wars and put them on the credit card. Look, the fault lies, as Shakespeare would say, the fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. These people work for us. And remember something. You say, well, the states should initiate that kind of a thing. Who are the loudest people complaining were the governors, because most federal grants, not all of them, most federal grants go to states and then the states distribute them. Meals on Wheels, for example. One of the big confusions that happened this week is that they put out this executive order that said any monies that go directly to citizens will not be affected. Well, everyone says, well, what if it goes to the state and then to citizens? Does that get affected? It was complete chaos. Here's the takeaway from this. They were making, I think, as a person who believes in fiscal responsibility, the Trump administration was making an important point, that there's a ton of money that goes out the door every day. But they wound up making another 2 points. One is, we don't really understand how government works. We think you can have a big proclamation and sign stuff, and that's how you change spending policy, because there is something called the Impoundment Control Act, which specifically says the president can't do this kind of thing. But the other thing is, unwittingly, they said to all of those Trump voters out there who think that, okay, these are all blue state programs, Meals on Wheels goes on in suburban Missouri just like it does in Brooklyn, and food stamps. There are more poor people in red states than there are in blue states. I think that if he figured out a way to make the point, here's how much money we spend, I think it would be a real service. That's why I'm optimistic about DOGE, by the way, that if they really do that, if they say to every agency, make a list from the most efficient thing you do to the least efficient that you do, and then report back to us.
The only thing I think that's kind of interesting is I don't have a lot of confidence that there's many other Democrats who would say the same thing. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe that's me being biased, but I just feel like exactly what you said. Like, oh, the idea of DOGE is kind of intriguing and potentially a positive thing. I just don't hear a lot of...
Well, that might be right. I mean, I'm exceptional in so many ways, James. I've been telling you that for the longest time. But I think
that's why we say Tony.
Exactly. I think that if Democrats were smart, they would recognize, I don't care where you are in the political spectrum, no one likes waste, right? No one likes fraud. No one likes these things. The point, I think what you'll find out if you do that exercise and you look at program number 211 that they do, you're going to see, okay, I understand why Congress passed that program. I understand why they have it. I understand why we do research on cancer. I understand why we try to figure out ways to put out fires. I understand it because all these programs, I remember, and again, we spent some time on this. I used to, with a guy named Jeff Flake of Arizona, we used to every year, I've talked about it on the program before, we used to try to get the subsidies for wool and mohair out of the federal budget because they were there from going back to before World War II when all of our army and military uniforms were made out of mohair. Okay, we haven't made them out of mohair in forever. If you go down if you go on Amazon, it's tough to even find anything made out of mohair, and yet still we subsidize mohair funding forever. We would go down there and it was like $50,000. It wasn't a lot of money. We were trying to make a point. Believe me when I say the agriculture community rallied around their brothers and sisters in the mohair business. And if you want to see a funny picture, there's a picture of me and Jason Chaffetz, who took it over when Flake left. The two of us standing there holding sheep by the horns. Long story short, someone is standing up for everything in the federal budget. But I think if Donald Trump and Musk and whomever want to highlight those things, more power to them, because I think ultimately Democratic programs are going to do fine if you hold us up to that analysis.
And that's an interesting aspect of scrutiny that we'll have to test. But I think that your point is well founded in the sense that it can't just be this concept of R versus D, blue versus red when it comes to potentially cutting government spending. If you're not including the military or whatever it is, something that conservatives would consider especially important to them, then you're not being genuine about it.
Hey, when Donald Trump said, I'm not going to cut Medicare or Social Security, and I'm still going to resolve the federal deficit, I think it was the right thing to do politically and something I support. I like Medicare. I like Social Security. But frankly, everyone knows, I don't know how many head starts you have to put together to get to one Medicare or to one Social Security if you really want to get serious about it. And that's why I believe ultimately the American system of government is the best system of government when compared to all the other ones, because we have congressmen that we send there to vote. Then we vote them up or down whether they're doing. Apparently, they don't care too much about spending. And by the way, the title of that segment, I didn't want people to be laughing the whole time. Spending frozen, ... and defrosted.
Yes.
And as I've pointed out the last couple of weeks, I'm putting more and more effort into this.
You are. You're really taking it very seriously.
I'm putting less effort into other elements of preparation for the show, but I'm doing more of that. So this one is kind of serious. Plane crashes, and Trump knows why. And then just to set that up, you've been reporting on it, doing a great job, you guys in the newsroom, about it. A tragic crash that occurred around a very dangerous airport in Washington, D.C. I flew in and out of Ronald Reagan a lot. It's an unusual airport because it's really the size of a regional airport servicing a major city, very short runway, and just down the street are military planes that are taking off, but whether it be from Andrews or closer by, and tragedy struck finally in a way that a lot of people, if you go back and now and read people's posts on Instagram and you read about some of the things that the air traffic controllers have said was going to happen maybe eventually if you weren't careful. So our heart goes out to the families that are involved, and our sympathy goes out to them. And we're going to find out what happened. One thing I learned when Flight 587 crashed in Rockaway, the NTSB gets their man. They figure it out eventually, and they're pretty good at their job. But I want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's response to this, which has gotten a lot of controversy. He comes out shortly after this, gets rid of all the stuff about my heart goes out to, and immediately starts blaming the Biden administration, blaming DEI, without any substantiation. Did you have problems with that, both as a news guy who knows to kind of wait to see what happens before Jim McCluskey, and as a partisan who supports Donald Trump?
Well, I think that it's sort of in some ways the same old debate in many ways, because Trump is a guy who clearly never really holds his tongue, bites his lip, whatever. He's going to say what's on his mind. And many times that kind of expands past the tidily prepared comments for something like the chief executive, which is obviously a person everybody's looking to when something awful and tragic like that happens. I understand people's objection. I think there's a lot of people who are thinking it's inappropriate to potentially get into other aspects of the situation when you're talking about an immediate horrifying event like that. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to say, look, this is why, in a roundabout way, because there's the possibility that somebody out there is thinking, do we have all the best people staffed in the FAA, in air traffic control centers, and all these different aspects of safety, really important jobs? Are they being filled by the best people? And no, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the reason that this happened, or that in some way one of these pilots was unqualified, or that one of the air traffic controllers was unqualified. There's been reporting that some of the staffing issues is potentially a factor in what happened here at the air traffic controlling centers, which are understaffed. But no, I think that while I understand people's feel that it wasn't a civil response or an appropriate response to get into aspects of DEI when talking about it, I didn't interpret it the same way. In other words, the crawl on all the TV networks was Trump blames DEI for crash. That to me is where the fake news runs up against my perception of it. But that's not what happened. He said that there are concerns with DEI, and we don't know for sure whether or not these best people are staffing these jobs.
No, he was asked at the. I mean, first of all, you say that there are staffing issues there. Who's the head of the FAA administrator?
There was just an acting commissioner, I believe.
No, there's no FAA administrator now at all, because the first day.
But didn't he appoint somebody as acting commissioner
Nope, it's vacant.
Okay.
I think it's vacant unless in the last 12 hours someone put it.
I thought he did
I know
that
someone
in
was
response
wearing
to-
an FAA jacket at the press conference, and that was the head of transportation, the head of the Secretary of Transportation. Who
Duffy.
did have, yeah, Duffy. I mean, because on January 20th, the FAA director was fired because he had a beef. Elon Musk had a beef with him because he had a problem with flying his plane and wanted it to be off the grid. And then on January 21st, air traffic controller hiring was frozen. And then on January 22nd, the Aviation Safety Advisory Committee was disbanded by Donald Trump. And then on January 28th, a buyout retirement demand was sent out to air traffic controllers. And we're going to get to that issue in a minute.
I'm going to let you go. I don't want to get too much in your way, but I believe there is some disputed reporting regarding the hiring freeze for the air traffic controllers.
Fair enough.
Because I think there was ongoing hiring practices, and they're saying, okay, those are still potentially being filled, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, the point I'm making is that, you say, oh, it's Trump just being Trump. You know what it reminds me of? And I just talked about this in the 3 o'clock hour. It reminds me of COVID, the COVID thing. That he reads something online or someone says something and he's like, some people say we should have bleach, or some people say we should do bright sunshine. And then it leaves it to the professionals in government to basically clean up the mess, which is what has been happening ever since, is that his people in his administration are trying to say, oh, yes, we don't know, or it turned out that it's not this or that. The problem is that we elect the president to be more than a guy who just sits in a seat and says stuff, who then goes on the internet and then tweets stuff. We rely on leaders, and part of leadership is resisting the temptation to be, as James Flippin would say, he's just talking about stuff. Because what happens when you just talk about stuff, it has real world impact on people. And, there is a long tradition of leaders behaving in a certain way. And you're like, I like that he's not acting like everyone else. Yes, he's acting like an internet troll at all times. And he's reminding us right away that in a moment of crisis, you don't want that. And I'll give you the last word.
Look, I would say this. I think there are plenty of people who have said, and I know some of them personally, you probably do as well, that they would never vote for Donald Trump because of his style, because of the way he is, because of the way he talks and acts and his behavior. Maybe that they don't mind some of his policies or whatever. You hear that sometimes from people. This is exactly what we're talking about. This is where the rubber meets the road. But to me, he's speaking like somebody who is kind of like the way people speak, right? We're concerned right now because there's a lot of things happening. Maybe the best and brightest aren't staffing all these positions. We want to find that out. We're tying it back to what we're doing with DEI. Is that the right time in the right place? Maybe not. And it doesn't offend me, but it does offend you. I get it.
Fair enough. And we'll be right back after the break.
It's the left versus the right. In the right corner, it's James Flippin. In the left corner, it's Anthony Weiner. 77 WABC.
So welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on your left and James Flippin, Flipmeister, whatever we're going to comment. By the way, with all seriousness, if you have suggestions on what his followers should be called, you're going to get used to seeing James Flippin around. He's really making some waves here at the station. People really seem to like what he does here. He's the second most popular member of this team, but still, he's with a bullet.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So the next thing is, again, an icy reception for the undocumented. Donald Trump, his signature issue was he was going to crack down on illegal immigration. He was going to close our border. And so here we are. We've now seen a couple of weeks of it, a lot of headlines, a lot of pictures. And you'll tell me your interpretation of it. Here's my interpretation. Nothing is happening. Meaning the same exact numbers. As a matter of fact, even fewer arrests and deportations are happening under Donald Trump than happened on a weekly basis under Joe Biden. No new law has been changed to close the border in any way. Remain in Mexico, which he said he was going to do on his first day. Still no Remain in Mexico in place because the Mexican government says we're not agreeing to any Remain in Mexico plan. He's having fights with the president of Colombia over whether it's going to be a military flight or a commercial flight. Dozens of commercial flights under Joe Biden. They're very common because we have a relationship with Colombia, but we don't see any sign of any flights going to Venezuela, so I don't know where those people are going. I guess what I would say, I would give the Trump administration A for PR and a D for really dealing with the problem of immigration. What grade would you give this first week or so?
Well, that's interesting, and there's going to be a meeting, or there was a meeting, I guess, on Friday between the Trump White House and Maduro in Venezuela, so there's at least some potential conversation there. That's a really interesting interpretation. So in other words, what you're saying is the fake news is acting as though there's a lot of stuff going on with arrests and deportations and raids, but that it's not really going on. Okay.
A lot of photo ops.
Okay. So in that respect, it would lead you to believe that the issue of immigration and deportations and whatever really wasn't covered by the news 4 years ago. In other words, you're suggesting that there were all these deportations going on, but it just wasn't being covered.
This has been my argument all along, that Joe Biden has except for Obama, no one's deported more people than Joe Biden.
Okay.
And his inability to communicate and to engage on immigration. And I've said this 50 times, including several times on this show. If I was in charge of being the spokesman for the Democratic Party in immigration, we would have won the election. Instead, we had Sleepy Joe. And yes, we could have done these pictures as well. Anyone could have done these pictures of guys going out and making arrests.
The problem is that doesn't jive with the message and the image that your party has attempted to cultivate, which is that you guys are the welcomers of illegal immigration, that you guys don't believe in migrant laws,
I gave you
sanctuary
A for photo op and PR, 100%. You get an A, no doubt about it.
And that's great. But the important thing is that the Border Patrol has also talked about that they have recorded fewer interactions in terms of border crossings since Trump came into office. The word's getting out that we're closed for business. So if you're hearing about these raids and it's making it on the news coverage all the way down to Central America, Mexico, in other words, word gets out. So there's a new sheriff in town. Even if you're suggesting it hasn't ramped up to the level that it could or possibly will if the funding is there from Congress, I think it's important that in this case, the perception is reality.
Yeah,
we talk about it with crime in New York City. They say, oh, it's all the perception of crime. If the perception is that you're not allowed to come here anymore as an illegal immigrant, then we're making some progress.
Hey, so I guess you agree with my grading. I said A for PR. You're doing a great job.
Well, so you're saying that they're not actually affecting as many arrests?
I can tell you, in the first week, you had 7,300 removals under Donald Trump. There are on average 15,000 a week under Joe Biden. 72% of the ICE arrests have turned out to be criminals under Joe Biden. Only 50% under Donald Trump. Hey, here's a fact that you're probably aware of. By the time Biden left office, the number of crossings was down to like 40,000 a month, which is lower than it was any time during Trump. So, yeah, believe me, you have the same 6,000 or so ICE officers. Not a single dime has gone for more ICE officers because he just got there. The same laws are in place. Not a single law has changed. This whole notion, I'm going to close the border. I've been saying to you, to Dominic, to John, to Curtis, there is no border closing switch with the possible exception of Title 42. And if you want to declare that the COVID emergency is back, knock yourself out. That has not happened. All of the BS about closing the border's closed. It's the same frickin' border, the same laws. Now the Republicans are in charge. The House, the Senate, the judiciary, the executive branch. Fix the laws. If you can, but you can't. So all you can do is press conferences and following around ICE officers, arresting some putz wearing a Jay-Z shirt.
But come on, I'm sure you thought that Kristi Noem looked pretty good in her ice jacket, right?
They're doing great. They're doing great. I mean, they're all...
and I would just like to say, to correct the record, just in case any of our listeners are outside of the border and thinking about, we are, in fact, the border is closed.
Yeah, exactly.
So just hear what I say.
Exactly.
Believe the perception.
By the way,
closed.
I don't dismiss that. I think you're right, by the way. I think the one critique of Joe Biden that was fair was the idea that during the campaign he says it's going to be very different. But here's the other thing that happened is also the word got out about something else. The word got out about the idea that our system is broken and that coming here and requesting asylum was going to be a 7-year wait for a hearing rather than a 6-month wait for it. And that was not created by Joe Biden. That was created by Congress not allocating the money. Donald Trump, when he was in office for 4 years, being obsessed by the stupid wall, which didn't get paid for by anybody. So I do think the word gets out, which is, by the way, and it's a conversation we talked about last week. We don't need to dwell on it. One of the reasons they had this app thing is to say, all right, we know you're coming. Let's just come in a more orderly way. And so, you make an appointment to come in. By the way, this is not hard to fix. How about this for an idea for a law? If you want to come here and request asylum, you've got to come through a port of entry. Simple as pie. Now, you got to put other things in, and people have different things that they want. These laws are not hard to fix. The only problem is you're going to find out, I predict. Your party is going to find out. You've got a president who doesn't understand governing. He thinks you can do everything by executive order. You've got a Congress that barely has a majority and has a lot of factions in them. And lawmaking is hard. And one of the things we elect presidents for is to help make better laws.
I think your response to the situation is probably a little more sincere and earnest than I would look at it, because you're saying governing's hard and that you got to build a consensus. All that's true. I think my cynical way of looking at it is they don't really want to solve the border issue because it's such a political
but who's
for both sides.
Not for both sides. We're getting crushed by this issue. Democrats, the Republicans love the issue. It's not us.
The difference is, at least in terms of my perception of it, is that you guys play the long game. So you want to get the kids in so that 20 years later they're voting for Democrats.
I mean, look, the history tells the story here. And the history is that we have had periodically presidents, it was Obama, President Bush, that said, let's try to solve this, even under Biden. Let's try to solve this problem, sit down, and come up with a compromise.
It goes all the way back to Reagan.
But at least then they did it. I'm saying that recently, in recent history, Obama, Biden, Bush, and Biden, well-meaning Democrats, well-meaning Republicans sat down to try to work this out. And ultimately, it was the Republican Party that ran away and screamed, amnesty, 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 amnesty. Or in the case of the election, it was Donald Trump saying, don't fix it, I want the issue. The Democrats are at the table. I think that this thing can get done. The Democratic side probably gave up more in that compromise under Biden than they're going to give up now under Trump, by the way.
I think that the issue that I have with all of this discussion is that it's really super academic when you're thinking about different ways to try to build a coalition or a consensus in government and negotiation, and this side gets that, and this side and compromise and all that. But I just think that there's a fundamental disagreement on how important the legalization of immigration and how that status is.
Yeah.
I hear all this stuff, like the virtue signaling terms like undocumented immigrants, and then the one side likes to use illegal aliens because they're like, oh, that one really twists for some reason. But that's the concern that I have, is that there's probably people on both sides who say, can we just figure this all out? But the fringe, at least in my perception of it, you can disagree, on the super far left is so dyed in the wool with the globalized idea of we shouldn't even have citizenship laws and all this kind of stuff.
This is not. Well, I'm going to tell you, the history just doesn't support your position. When we sat down in the Obama administration, the lead guy for the Democrats was this guy named Gutierrez representing Illinois. He's about as far left as you're going to get on any of this stuff. And he was ready to agree to, a guest worker program to help out businesses, a certain, changing the laws, increase. I would agree with you right now. I think you and I, if we ever devoted 15 minutes of a show to coming up up with a compromise that both you and I thought we could agree on as one conservative and one liberal, we'd be able to do it. It's not super duper hard. So long as you're not afraid of the right wing of the Republican Party saying, oh, there was amnesty, we're not going along with anything, because under any imaginable program, of the 15 million who are here that are not documented, some of them are good people being American in every way. And I don't say give them a pass. I say make them pay a fine, put them at the end of the line, not the front of the line, but stop trying to throw them out of the country.
The one thing I'll say, and I'll flip it on its head a little bit, because I'll use an example that I think is going to curry some support with you, if you would. There's a hesitancy because I think Republicans feel, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, and as George W. Bush would say, you ain't going to fool me again. So, like, it's sort of like Hamas, right? And thinking about Gaza, Israel's like, oh, we're just going to make a deal this time and then everything will be cool. We're just going to live in harmony and everything's going to be fine. No, it's not, because they know they've heard those lies before. I take it back to Reagan and this whole idea that we'll grant all this amnesty, but then we seal the border. Then we figure this out.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
We've heard it before.
Yeah, except the difference is, when you say you've heard it before, yes, every 20 years or so, we change what we want in immigration. Sometimes we wanted to reunite the Irish, thinking they got separated from each other. Sometimes we want more tech workers. And so laws get passed by lawmakers of both parties. You get a little bit of this, we get a little bit of that. I'm not saying it's easy and that they're not compromised. It's easy that no one has to compromise, but it is not hard to write it on a piece of paper. And if we say the broad consensus, I do this on my radio show every year or so. I say, here's the solution to immigration. I say, call and tell me what your problem is with this. And most people are like, yeah. And by the way, all of these ICE workers that are now rounding up people, you know what they're not doing? They're taking away from what was done a lot under the Trump administration, focusing on employers who are employing undocumented people. Remember, if you only have 6,000 workers, so they got to figure out how they're going to enforce the law. I think that a consensus is not that hard.
I'd like to believe that's true. I do think that the vast majority of the American people look at it like, look, make it easier to do it the legal way. Try to streamline the process. We've heard it all for years, and I think that there is some sort of solution that should be able to be reached there. Whether or not that happens, obviously that's
here's what I would say to you.
Word.
I think enforcement first. Okay? If you want to say, first we'll hire all the additional officers, first we'll put in the new fentanyl tracking things before we do anything for additional visas or anything, fine, sign me up. I think that's perfectly reasonable to say that, so long as it's part of a real solution. And I want to tell you, that side of it, you're going to learn in the next couple of months when Donald Trump submits his budget, is not cheap. That's a lot of people. And
it's also sticky because even amongst people on the right, you've seen it with the H-1B visa thing, there's a whole element of MAGA that says we don't want, and I understand that's the super extreme side of it, we don't want any immigration.
There are some people that still call in on my show and call in when you're co-hosting your shows that say, well, wait a minute. Someone came in 15 years ago. They overstayed. They're here illegal. I don't care how good a business they have. I don't care how many times they go to church and how quickly they learned English and how many taxes they pay. They still should be thrown out. There are people that view that. I don't believe that's the consensus of the country. I believe the consensus in the country is, you know what? If he paid his taxes, if he learned English, put him at the end of the line, make him pay a fine. But, the whole idea we're going to throw those people out, we'll never be stopping throwing people out.
And I think most people say that they want the bad hombres kicked out, to borrow the Trump term.
And that's the low-hanging fruit, and that's something that Trump did, Biden did, and we're still doing to this day. All right, the next one, I put a funny heading on it, condoms for Hamas. Wait, what? The only reason I put that is I wanted to get your feedback as a professional press person. Mm-hmm. The new press secretary for Donald Trump gave her first press availability. She made instant waves by saying we want more unconventional media being here. A guy from Breitbart was moved to the front row. A guy from Axios was moved to the front row. I don't know who these people are. I only listen to 77 WABC News Radio, the most powerful signal in the nation.
You should check out Axios. You'd like it a lot.
I'm sure I would. I am completely loyal. When I took the job working with John and Margaret Katsimatidis, I pledged I get all my news from 77 WABC. That's why I have a gun in my mouth most of the time.
Yeah, right.
But we only have a minute or two about this. But tell me, what is your feedback? I put that in because she was defending the freeze, and she says we have $50 million for condoms for Hamas. That turned out to be completely made up. But she got some good reviews for being kind of a good spokesman for the hard-ass MAGA movement. What did you think of what's her name? Kathleen Levitt?
Caroline Levitt. Yeah, I did the youngest ever, by the way, at 27 years old, so that's pretty impressive. But I feel as though this is kind of like a microcosm of it's funny. It dates back because I think Trump was the first one to say we're cutting down on the $50 million for condoms for Gaza, and then she had to field a question on it. In other words, I don't think she had it as part of her opening statement.
No, she had it as a part of the justification for the freeze.
So she mentioned that there's certain line items.
We're giving $50 million. Now, don't you think that's outrageous? Back to the press corps, and everyone's like, "What the hell is she talking about?"
So I looked into it because I honestly that's something that I had missed. And I looked into it. There's some speculation that this is part of the ongoing health support that's sent to Palestine and Gaza in terms of there are blanket amounts of money that go for like reproductive health, aspects of health, neonatal care, all that. And potentially there's some even more specific line item that goes to condoms. There's also, and this is the speculation online, I'm just putting it all out there, that maybe there was a misunderstanding between Gaza down in like southern Africa where we have some efforts.
It was here. Let me
surrounding AIDS control.
There's an organization called AID, Assistance for International Development, and they do. We, the taxpayer, do provide grants, including for contraception in Africa, to basically help them not make as many babies,
and maybe also AIDS.
But we're not. None of that money was going to Gaza. That money was there was no money going to Gaza for quite some time because there's no. We do it through NGOs, and there are no NGOs that are operating there that we can trust anymore. All that being said, you thought she did a good job. I thought she did a good job too. Once again, these briefings are much-watched TV, and thank goodness we needed more must-watch TV, and we'll be right back.
It's the left versus the right. From Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC.
So welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on the left, James Flippin on the right. If you miss any part of the program, you can get it as a podcast. You can get little bits of us on TikTok again. Thank you, somebody. I don't know who to thank.
Yeah, that one. We had some viral moments last week.
I guess we did. That was mostly mostly me being appropriately fired up. But you can get James Flippin's program. Keep an eye out. James Flippin's doing a lot of filling in, as like 2/3 of the crowd here at the station's running for one office or another.
Yeah,
there's plenty of opportunities.
By the way, are any updates there? Still thinking?
A memo came from upstairs. I should talk about it less. So I'm going to talk about it less because the last thing I need to do.
Yeah, you're just home meditating and thinking about life.
Exactly. So let's go to. There's been a flurry of controversial appointments. Some have not been very controversial, whether you like them or not. Kristi Noem, the guy with the eyebrows that was Interior Secretary. Some of them have breezed through. Rubio is 99, I think, to nothing. But I would say the three hottest numbers now are RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard for head of intelligence, and Kash Patel, your buddy, for the head of the FBI. I don't know how much of a summary we have to do except to say, here, let me do this. Kennedy got in the most trouble for his... here's what they seem to have in common. They seem to be trying to walk away or downplay the most controversial things they've said in the past. Kennedy's been trying to walk away or downplay his stuff about vaccines, although he's got other stuff that some Republicans are concerned about being kind of not so pro-business. Tulsi Gabbard's trying to walk away from her commentary that she's made and the support that she's given to the Assad regime in Syria, saying basically, I didn't trust my own intelligence. I believed what I was told by other intelligence. And Kash Patel, everything from being critical of the FBI in general, of having an enemies list in his book, and of going on anti-Semites radio shows. I know I'm giving kind of a one-sided because these are the controversies. It's presumed they're going to have broad support around Republicans, but the math is I think they can only lose 3 Republicans in order for any of these to pass, and they all have various problems. Give us either... Pick one of those, go over all of them. What do you think? How do you think it's going? Are there any of these 3 that even you wouldn't vote for?
No. I mean, I think the one that gives me a little bit of pause just because of the way that he's been so controversial and kind of all over the place, and there's some things about him that definitely make me think, what's this guy's deal? But RFK Jr. is the one that might sort of give me some thought. And I'm not so sure. Is every Republican definitely going to vote for him?
No, I think no. If every Republican votes for all of them for him, then he wins.
So RFK, it might be a little bit. Maybe there's some Democrats who would even think about it.
Who voting for him?
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't seem from the hearing.
Right.
And I have not heard. I've heard plenty of people like Fetterman, for example, say, I'm open to him.
Okay.
The problem is, it seems, and I didn't want to cut off your take, but it seems that in all three of their cases, it seems like they did more harm in their hearings than good. Like, for example, in this guy Kennedy, the senator from... Which senator? The guy who used to be a doctor. I'm sorry.
Oregon? Was that the one you
No,
get into
the
with?
Republican. Cassidy, forgive me. Cassidy used to be a doctor, very concerned about vaccines, Republican. If they lose him, it's seen as being a bit of a problem. With Tulsi Gabbard, a lot of conservatives had problems because she would not condemn Snowden, for example. And with Cash, you can't tell because there's a pro-law enforcement side of the Republican Party that still exists, not in this room, but it still exists.
Right. Local law enforcement.
So
yes.
they're all on the knife's edge. They're all very, very close here.
Okay, so let me just correct the record quickly to just make the point that local cops, I'm all for. It's the federal police force that I have a problem with.
Got it.
No, I think that there's three main issues, touch points, that get these three in some trouble, that make them sort of controversial and why they're not definite confirmations. For Kennedy Jr., it's the way that he pushes back on Big Pharma and the way that he can potentially cause problems for the profit margin of all these different pharmaceutical companies. And, I talked about this on one of the shows I hosted last week where I said, I'm of the mindset that it's not a bad thing to just question science and say, do we know for sure whether or not this is the right thing? Should these little kids be getting inoculations, boom, 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 right one after another? Is that connected at all to autism? I don't know. I'm not going to be anti-vaccine just because there's certain questions about it, but you do want to be careful. And he made some good points concerning what we learned about the COVID vaccine kind of over time, but yet there were mandates that you have to get it in order to have a shot and all this, in order to have a job or potentially go somewhere. So there's questions about that, and of course Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders acting holier than thou while they take millions of dollars in campaign contributions from pharmaceutical companies. So I found that really rich. And then for Patel, look, at the risk of opening up old wounds between us, it's the January 6th thing, and this whole idea that there is a bias that protects certain aspects of long-standing government in established agencies. And you heard Stephen Miller recently on CNN saying, the predominance of government employees voted for Kamala Harris. The predominance of government employees are Democrats. So this concept that there's potentially some bias within the FBI, and Kash Patel sort of taking a really extreme position on that, in my take, which I'm supportive of, is what gets him in trouble. And then with Tulsi Gabbard, look, you saw it from as elevated a voice and position as Senator Chuck Schumer. You mess with the intelligence community, they've got 7 ways from Sunday of getting back at you. He said that it was going to happen. And then over time, you saw where Trump is being implicated for having classified documents that he wasn't supposed to have, something I've never heard of a president being accused of before. Obviously, we know all the criminal cases that he faced and some idea that potentially the FBI was involved in Russiagate in a nefarious way and all this kind of thing. So there's 3 main issues that connected these 3 people. I don't think it's them. It's what they know and what they've threatened to expose should they get into those positions.
Yeah, well, that sounds completely wacky. So let's just, I'll take it at face value, though, because I think you're saying it in good faith. When you are the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, and you have under it the FDA and the Centers of Disease Control, no, it's not your job to raise questions, to be the guy on the internet who's like, oh, I wonder what would happen. No, we turn to agencies of government to be people that advise us on the science, on the best practices. Does that mean that, back in medieval days, we thought leeches was a way to get the bad blood out and that science doesn't progress? No, but
they still use leeches, I think, in some surgical.
We count on this office not to be someone who is spinning whatever theory they might think is right, and to look at the science. And frankly, that's not what this guy is. Now you say, well, I value that curiosity, that raising the possibility thing. Okay, take a different job. You did this to sell books. Go back to selling books. Be a whack. We don't care. But now to put this person in a position where parents might listen to this guy and kill their kids is a problem. We saw that in Samoa. We could see it in America now. And then you say, do you want to hop in there?
All I want to say is that you're, again, sort of making the point that you feel that it's completely established and that there is no question whatsoever about the efficacy of vaccines or potential for injury. If that's your position, and that's your position with your family and your children, that's totally fine.
No, but that's the position. This agency is not the agency that says you can't make an individual choice for your family. This agency is one that gives information to parents to make informed, smart choices. And by the way,
he did say he supports the vaccine schedule for children.
That's exactly right. He changed his position. It's kind of which of the person do you, but that was a through line of all three of these, as I said, is they were running from their previous positions. He literally filed a lawsuit to stop me from getting a vaccine. You know that? He filed a lawsuit to stop me from getting a vaccine. Not children, not his kids, me, to stop everyone from getting it, because he was profiting on this scare that he perpetuated. He was selling books around it, saying things like, saying things that the science community had said was not true, and people died because of it.
Well, again, I just think that this whole concept of saying the science community said this,
yes,
and then it's established and it's done, it's finished. That's not the way it works.
That's actually not what happens. They say the best information, the best science we have, here's the recommendation we make on the best information.
And that stuff changes over time.
It does. But at the moment that you say it, you should say stuff that is established and is known. Like, for example, we know right now we live on a round planet. We might not have known it in the 1600s. We know it now.
Right.
So for someone to say, well, I don't mind having the head of NASA being a flat earther, because you never know.
But that's different. That's saying something akin to, we don't exactly know the best way to transfer energy in terms of information between like the moon and the Earth in terms of NASA missions, and it might be better on a radio frequency, but we're going to try Wi-Fi. It's like different ways.
We know the efficacy
It's
of
not
vaccines.
like he's saying that we don't want vaccines at all.
We know
he's saying that there are potentially ongoing concerns.
That's the problem. That's the problem, Mr. Kennedy's PR person. He actually did. He was asked about this at the hearing and didn't deny it. He filed a lawsuit saying that no one should be allowed to get these vaccines. Now, thank God it wasn't successful. Saying not me, saying no one should. And let me just continue. And then you say, well, Kash Patel, he's got justifiable criticism about this. No, his job as the head of the FBI is to enforce the law, right? It is not.
Isn't it to run the FBI?
Yeah, it's a law enforcement agency. I'm sorry.
Right.
I don't understand the distinction.
Well, he's running the organization, so of course he can't break the law while doing so.
Right, but his laws, his thing isn't to I don't like the law, or I don't like the interpretation, or there's some state that's below the understate that's under my understate that I call the deep state.
And I'm not trying to nitpick here, but the point is his job is to actually run the organization. He's not an FBI agent. He's not out there trying to investigate crimes.
Right. He wants the job as the head of a law enforcement organization.
Yeah.
So that means not taking his own judgment for what the law is, taking the law for what the law is. So, for example, the law determined in dozens and dozens of instances who won the 2020 election. It was legally challenged, legally processed, legally discussed, legally dispensed with, and he still said no.
In front of biased judges.
What biased judges? Republican and Democratic judges in Democratic and Republican states. You seem to forget where these challenges came from. They were intentionally shopped to conservative areas by people like Rudy Giuliani and others, and they failed in every instance. Mm-hmm. In every instance.
Right.
In every instance. Yeah, right. Well, that's why you can't be the head of the FBI either, because
I don't want it. I don't want the job.
Because you think that the job of the FBI is to decide whether or not you like the legal process.
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact.
Well, this is Kash, but let me just finish the Kash Patel, because I don't want to put it back on you. That's confusing to the listener. Here's what Kash Patel has said over the course of the last several years. You can't trust the legal system. You should not support the legal system. You should rebel against the legal system.
Oh, stop.
Stop. He supported the 2020 insurrectionists.
Against the.
He said you're doing the right thing by attacking the Capitol.
Insurrectionist. expressing their constitutional right to protest.
No, they were thrown in prison. That's just, you're making my point.
No.
You think maybe you are.
No.
Are you making the point that the head of the FBI should not listen to what courts say?
Look, what happened?
I think you are unwittingly making that argument.
No, I'm not. On January 6th, there was nobody there with some realistic means to overtake the government. That's what insurrection is. It's basically saying that the government that exists,
do they have guns?
We're doing away with it. We're going to take it out.
Did they have guns?
Was that what they were trying to do that day?
Did they?
Seriously.
They said, let's go stop Mike Pence.
Were they seriously trying to overturn the government, or were they saying we want the election results
hang Mike
certified?
Pence say I'm curious. When you're doing an insurrection and you're saying hang the guy
doing an insurrection.
You're saying, okay, you're making my point.
Okay, well, you are as well for me because it was never codified in a court of law that there was ever any insurrection.
First of all,
why wasn't Trump impeached then? Why wasn't he convicted?
He was impeached.
Why wasn't he convicted by the Senate?
Twice.
Why wasn't he convicted?
Because you have the Republicans in the Senate were whores and said he's on the way out the door anyway.
Oh, okay.
Ask Mitch McConnell.
The system's all good until it doesn't get the result that you want.
No, but the point that I'm making is that there was no. If Kash Patel was said the system worked for Donald Trump and I support the system, I don't have a beef with that position. He's saying the system did not work because I didn't like the outcome that courts decided on, juries decided on, grand juries. Let me finish my thought. Grand juries decided on. He decided I want to be the head of the FBI when I have spent the last 5 years saying I don't believe in the systems of government that include the FBI. It doesn't work like that.
What he has been saying is that the FBI is corrupt, that it's missed the plot, and that it's off its axis when it comes to the mission that it's supposed to be doing, which is unilaterally following the law, the letter of the law, not allowing politics to be an influence, not allowing them to be the Gestapo of the deep state.
Should the FBI follow courts?
The FBI does follow courts.
Right. So when they follow, in the courts,
being an FBI director,
when the courts determine that people attack police officers, beat the crap out of them, they should be in prison. Do you respect that? Do you respect that? Do you respect the fact that courts said the 2020 election was correctly decided? Apparently not. That's why Kash Patel should not be the FBI.
We've done the 2020 election many times.
I'm talking about Kash now. You unfortunately took his side.
No. You're talking about that the concept of being FBI director is picking and choosing what laws should or shouldn't be enforced. What I'm telling you is the job of the FBI director is to run the agency the way it's supposed to be run. And that's what Kash Patel has been talking about.
Investigating crimes.
Right, and not your political opponents.
Let me ask you this. Should he ignore subpoenas? Should he ignore the rights in the Sixth Amendment?
Like Eric Holder did?
No, he's the one who says, I don't believe we should challenge what courts do and not respect it. Now he wants to be an agent of the court who doesn't respect it.
You're again, one of my favorite phrases, which is something you love to do, is be willfully obtuse. You are making the question over the legitimacy of something as large and as complicated and as multifaceted as a nationwide election. And what happened in and around COVID and the way the laws were changed, in my opinion, improperly in the 6 months left until you're going to have that election. It was done way too late. So you had all this suspension of law under the guise of keeping people safe from a virus or all this kind of stuff.
No one suspended any laws. The courts were asked this question. This is not a new question. James Flippin didn't just wake up and realize this theory existed.
And guess what?
It was tested in courts and laughed out of court.
Also, Anthony, there's a lot of people, look at the numbers, that have questions about that 2020 election. Kash Patel being one of them doesn't mean that he can't run the FBI.
Hey, one of the reasons we have courts is to solve questions, and one of the reasons we have radio is to listen to Vinny Badugno.
I've been matchmaking all my life. I introduced my best friend and his wife. I introduced my program director, Kevin Drosch, to Inhala. And now I'm going to match you with Inhala. Yes, you two should sleep together. Skip the sleep center. Avoid the CPAP machine. Get in bed with Inhala. It's a custom-fit oral appliance. There's no bulky hoses or uncomfortable mask. Inhala works with your private medical insurance and makes the process seamless. I talked to the people at Inhala.com, and they're going to help you just like they helped out Kevin and his fiancée. She'll finally be able to sleep through the night while Kevin is using Inhala. Follow Kevin's sleep journey right here on 77 WABC. Now is the time for a treatment that is right for you. Visit Inhala.com or call 844-INHALA-1. That's 844-INHALA-1. So like my program director, Kevin, skip the sleep center, avoid the CPAP machine, get in bed with Inhala. Inhala.com, INHALA.com.